Hello, everyone. Okay, we are nearing the end of addiction and your second year options now. Exam might start to feel a lot closer. Today's video is going to focus on how to reduce addictions in this case. So, um, we've looked at how you get nicotine addiction, we've looked at how you get gambling addictions, we've obviously talked about wider addictions like alcohol or heroin or caffeine in this case, and that's a full cup of caffeine there. But now we're looking at how you reduce addiction. Now, a really obtuse point to recognize is that it says reducing addiction, not treating addiction. Addiction, in a way, can never truly be treated. You want to reduce their addictive impulses and urges and cravings, but can you ever really treat them? Not really. If you're looking to reduce one of your addictions, you have to completely redefine your relationship with your addictive substance. And that's how you reduce addiction. A heroin addict cannot go back to just taking a little bit of heroin. An alcoholic can't really go back to having a normal relationship with alcoholic. If you want to treat it, you have to reduce it to nil in this case. So there's actually quite a lot that we're looking at here, as per a lot of these addiction slides. We're going to be looking at this from a biological point of view in terms of drug therapy, giving drugs to reduce drugs. We're going to be looking at this from a behavioral point of view, but also from a cognitive behavioral point of view as well. So there's quite a lot of stuff that we are going to be looking at here. So this may be a bit of a long video. But before we go into this, it's obviously worth pointing out, now I haven't looked at these slides really for a long time, and I'm certainly going to improve these slides and just maybe a couple of model peels. But something that's really important that isn't picked up on quite a lot is there is no one way to reduce addiction. Your treatment has to be based on the idiosyncratic and the particular chemical of the drug. So how I treat a cannabis addiction would be incredibly different to how I treat a gambling addiction or a heroin addiction or an alcohol addiction. Each of those, because the chemical nature and the nature of the drug is so different, the idiosyncratic treatment has to be the same as well. So there's a variety of ways in which you will treat addictive substances. And one of those is drug therapy. Now, there are three types of drugs you need to know, and you also need to know how they work. So drug therapy to treat addiction. There is a bit of an article here which I think is quite useful to go through. But essentially, in terms of dealing with alcohol withdrawal, but a lot of it is based around what we call the DTs. Now, the delirium tremens or the delirium tremors are horrible. The DTs are what some people get when they come off certain addictions, and they can actually kill you. The DTs, it's not uncommon for them to kill you. So causes of delirium tremors: if you drink, if you come off alcohol too quickly, you will suffer what's called the DTs. Now, these are the physical symptoms of DTs. Now, I want you to imagine you are addicted. I want you to imagine that you are addicted to alcohol and you come off alcohol. You're going to experience alcohol withdrawal syndrome, and you're going to experience some of these. Now, these are horrible. Chest pains, deep sleep lasting a day, a full day. Some of you may like that, admittedly, but not if you have a job to go to and you miss your job and you get fired and blah, blah, blah. Energy bursts, fatigue, fever, headaches, heavy sweating, increased heart rate, increased startle reflex, involuntary muscle movements or contractions, loss of appetite, nausea, pale skin, epileptic episodes, I can't say that word, sensitivity to light, stomach pain, tremors and shakiness, and that's why they're called the DTs, because you shake quite a lot. You're going to be anxious, confused, suffering delirium, having delusions, suffering depression, disorientation, excitement, fear, hallucinations, irritability, nervousness, nightmares, rapid mood changes. The point I'm saying here is that all of that can be fixed by having the substance that your body craves and loves the most. That's why addictions are unbelievably difficult to beat, because you're suffering all of this. That to me is worse than the flu. And keep in mind, DTs can kill you or have been known to kill people. It's theorized that that's what Amy Winehouse died of when she came off alcohol too quickly. Amy Winehouse didn't die of a drug overdose like most people think. She was actually clean off drugs by that point, but she came off alcohol too quickly and suffered the DTs. Now, she came off it too quickly. The analogy I use with my students is those of you who, I know, scuba dive, for example, scuba diving, if you come up to the surface too quickly, you suffer what's called the bends, and it's about nitrogen can't escape out your body, or it's coming out your body too quickly, or no, it can't escape out your body, and you die of that. And I use that as an analogous condition to the DTs, is if you're coming off alcohol too quickly, if you go cold turkey off heroin, if you go cold turkey off alcohol, you will suffer the DTs. And again, all of these DTs can be stopped instantly by taking a sip of the lovely substance that you like and crave. And so if I was having all of these because of tea, which you don't, by the way, that's a ridiculous thing. But if I were to, and I've got a cup of tea, that's really hot. I'm obviously going to drink that, and I'm going to feel great straight away. So this is how hard addictions are to get off. So you need to have a good idea about what it's like to go through the DTs, and so you have to slowly wean people off. Now there are three main drugs, as I've said, that kind of come with drug therapy. Now, these may not match exactly to the workbook, but again, if it's not in the workbook, write it in the workbook because it is really, really useful. So the first one are called aversives. And the point of aversives is to try and make you sick. They are also known as emetics. So I've had an antiemetic before when I had food poisoning and I just kept being sick. An antiemetic stops you being sick. An emetic makes you sick. And sometimes you need to make people sick. And in this case, the drug is taken alongside the addictive drug to purposely encourage the individual to vomit. So if, for example, you have an alcohol addiction, what I would do is I would make you take the drug and drink alcohol and keep drinking it, and very, very quickly you're going to be sick. Now, if you come up and, oh, that was horrible, right? Again. And eventually what's going to happen is you're going to pair the taste of vomit, which is universally hated. That's why this is so useful, is because you're taking something that is universally hated by everybody and therefore should be able to treat everybody. It's not like there's some people that love vomit and think, oh God, vomit and alcohol, yes please, let me drink both of them. Oh, why did I even say that? Sorry if you're emetophobic, by the way. But it's basically, this is quite important what I'm about to say actually. Aversives can be used in drug therapy, or they can be used in behaviourist therapy, because you're pairing vomit with the addictive substance with the idea that it would put you off the addictive substance. If I drunk tea to the point where I was being sick, I'm drinking tea, emetic, eventually, every time I take a sip, it's going to remind me a bit of vomit, and it's going to stop me. That might actually be a good thing to do. Maybe I will try that. Antagonists are something else as well. Now, these work in a very, very different way, and like I say, you need to know the technical way in which they do work. But antagonists basically block the receptor. They bind to the receptor sites and block, so the drug can't fit in. Like the dopamine dopamine kind of hits the receptor site, but because something's already in there, like the drug is bound to the receptor site, the dopamine kind of comes and then kind of bounces off. So you don't get that dopaminergic reaction. You don't get that sense of pleasure. So, for example, if I were to take an antagonist and then drink tea, I wouldn't be feeling that pleasurable sensation I get when I drink the tea. And all of a sudden, this thing that I'm addicted to is no longer really that addictive or pleasurable, or, you know, I'm no longer getting that dopamine hit, if you will, because the antagonists block the binder. The other one's a bit weird, and for the other one, I'm going to go straight back to the beginning because this is an agonist drug. I'll show you in a second. For those of you, hopefully you don't know what this is. If you do know what this is, then I'm slightly worried. But that there is methadone. Methadone is a synthetic heroin. It's like a kind of a man-made heroin, if you will. It's green liquid, incredibly addictive, like heroin is, and it works in the same way as heroin. So why are we giving people who are addicted to heroin, arguably the worst drug to get addicted to, why are we giving people who are addicted to heroin man-made heroin in order to fix their addiction? That is what we do with agonists. So the point about agonists is that they're drug substitutes. So they work in exactly the same way as the drug, but the key difference here is that because they're regulated, so made by drug companies, they're not contaminated, and they're going to be safer. If I were to go to a part of Southampton, I haven't one in mind, but if I were to go to a part of Southampton and go to a drug dealer person and say, "Hello, sir," or "Ma'am," #feminism, I would like some heroin, please. And they presumably give me heroin in what is a perfectly safe transaction. I don't know what's in that. There's going to be all sorts of crap that's in that heroin. Whereas if I get it from GlaxoSmithKline, like a drug company, it's regulated, it's safer. And the idea is then, under the supervision of clinics, you can slowly come off. You can slowly just reduce the amount of methadone. Method 1, if you don't know how to spell that, method 1. You can slowly wean yourself off. Now, biological treatments. Slightly unethical. You could argue they're slightly unethical, especially if they're making you sick, especially if you're essentially giving them fake heroin. But these are the general strategies. You need to know the specifics. Now, the other ones you could also talk about here, kind of biological, are NRTs. Now, NRTs is a specific way to treat smoking or nicotine addiction. You may know them as nicotine patches. Just hear Anthony coming down the corridor. But you've probably come across these as nicotine patches. And these are really common. Now, how they work is exactly the same, pretty much. Is they're giving you the drug. These are agonists, basically. They're giving you the drug, in this case, nicotine, but they're scrapping out the other 399 chemicals that are in the average cigarette. You're not getting the tar. You're not getting the other ones, the other 398. So you're only getting the nicotine. It's safe, it's regulated, you know how much nicotine you're getting, and you can slowly wean yourself off. So the patches still deliver the nicotine and still has the dopamine and the VTA and stuff like that, but you're not getting all that other shit that's essentially going to kill you. And then the great thing about patches, who have helped millions, by the way, the great thing about patches is that users can manage their withdrawal at their own pace. Not too fast, not too slow, a little bit in the middle. Now, evaluations of these biological... Hey! Oh, tree, scared the life out of me then. Scared the... That man. Scared the bloody life out of me then. These are for the biological treatments, right? So Sorry, my heart's still going. There's a good amount of research support that suggests that NRTs are particularly effective, so up to 70% more likely to be off these cigarettes after smoking for 6 months. So, first question about these treatments: do they work? Seemingly they do, though not for everybody. There are some side effects to NRTs, though, and there are side effects to all of them. Dizziness, sleep disturbance, headaches, though you could argue the benefits hugely outweigh the cost. You know, if you've got a headache, if you take a paracetamol, if you've got a headache, take a paracetamol. If you're dizzy, don't stand up. If you've got sleep disturbance, try sleep it off. So side effects are a bit minimal, really. But here's quite an important point that I think is quite topic specific. If we're treating addictions, that will then mean that society see them as something to be treated, i.e. an illness, and not a criminal activity. As society progresses, we're starting to see addictions for what I believe they are, an illness. Instead of people going, oh, well, they got themselves hooked on heroin, they can get themselves off hooked heroin. That was terribly phrased. We're not so much seeing addictions these ways. So by treating the disorders, I suppose you could say that we're progressing society's perspective on addictions to more of an illness to be treated rather than a behaviour to be criminalised. Not being funny, I did just word that quite beautifully, like a poet. But you can feel free to copy. Now, those are the biological treatments. I want to look at the behavioural treatments. And the first one's going to seem quite easy, a little bit like phobias, to be honest. What we're about to go through is a little bit like phobias. Counter conditioning, what can be learned, can be unlearned or relearned, for example. So instead of you associating a drug with something pleasant like euphoria or joy, we're slowly going to condition you for it to be paired with something unpleasant. And again, what is universally unpleasant? Guilt and or emetophobic's vomiting in this case. Now, aversion therapy looks incredibly similar to the drugs we were talking about earlier, and that's because it is. You basically take the emetic, wait 10 minutes, drink the alcohol, and then you're sick. You do that again and again and again. You can use this for a biological perspective or a behaviorist perspective. Maybe not both, but you can use it for one or the other, so make sure you do. And the specific drug you might want to talk about here is called antabuse. Now, I did some research on antabuse. It's pretty rough. It's really rough. So it basically makes you sick upon the ingestion of alcohol, because basically what antabuse does, and this is really interesting, antabuse speeds up the link between you drinking and getting a hangover. It does it by working with something to do with the liver and breaking down. I don't really understand it. But basically, antabuse makes that gap a lot smaller. So essentially, you get a hangover as soon as you are drinking. And to my students who I talk about this quite a lot, that means drinking alcohol then has what we call time contiguity. Time contiguity, contiguity, time contiguity is the extent to which you are rewarded or punished immediately after the behavior. So if you're drinking tea and then immediately being sick, you're going to link those two quite closely together. Whereas if you're drinking and then 8 hours later, 12 hours later, 15 hours later, you're being sick, you're not going to pair them two because that doesn't have time contiguity. So antabuse narrows the time difference between doing the behavior and then getting punished for it. And in this case, increasing the amount that alcohol has then got time contiguity. So it essentially produces an immediate hangover, which I think is fascinating. Now, in terms of evaluations, I'm hoping you can come up with this off the top of your head, but is it effective? Yes. Find a piece of research. What are the economic implications of this? If we can treat people with an alcohol addiction who can't maintain functionality of work and relationships, maybe do a bit of research into how many days are lost a year because of alcoholism. Why don't I just do that for you? That's a brilliant idea. How many days are lost each year to alcoholism? I don't know if I'm going to find anything. We're going to give it a crack. 300 million deaths. I mean, that's a stat in itself. Worldwide, 3 million deaths every year result from the harmful use of alcohol. Those harmful deaths will include a lot of work by the NHS to try to keep the people alive, for example. Come on, let's see if we can get a little factoid here. Is this... Oh, I don't care about the States. Sorry if you're American. I do care about the States, so just not right now. UK, there we go. Should have done this before. Wow, look at that. I mean, that's not true. That's 602,000 dependent drinkers. I mean, there's 5 million alcoholics in the UK. I'm pretty sure 602,000 for this, the severe type, but only 18% are receiving treatment. That's bad, isn't it? That's bad. 18% are receiving treatment. 9,000 alcoholic specific deaths. Alcohol misuse. This is all good to write about, to be honest. Alcohol misuse is the biggest risk factor for death, ill health, and disability among the 15 to bloody hell. Is that true? That can't be right. Alcohol misuse is the biggest risk factor for death, ill health, and disability among 15 to 49-year-olds. Jesus, that's quite bad. Look at all this economic implications. This is costing us a ton of money. So if we can treat it, if we can reduce addiction, then maybe there's going to be major economic implications down the line by keeping people in work. Now, apparently, making people sick, violently sick, repeatedly after they take their substance is unethical, right? Even though they've signed up for it, even though you're trying to help them, apparently it is unethical. So as it is with modern society, we've gone, not allowed to do that anymore unless really severe. So instead of making them sick, why don't we just get them to imagine being sick? Right? And that is what covert sensitization is. Apparently, the rising ethical issues and pressures during the 1970s made people think maybe making people relentlessly and systematically and repeatedly sick is not probably a good idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to repeat this, but we're going to get them to imagine. So in the place of an actual stimulus response, clients are asked to imagine how it would feel. Now, it does require two things, and this is worth writing down. It requires the client to be quite good at using their imagination, but it also involves an incredibly skilled therapist who can really paint a picture, a really vivid picture, and that requires a pretty strong what's called therapeutic alliance. A therapeutic alliance is the relationship between a therapist and a counsellor. So it does involve a lot of detail, a lot of effort. So how can you attack this? You can do this in a number of ways, all sensory. So I can get you to imagine. Emetophobes, you may want to silence this for this slide, to be honest. You may want to silence this. I can get you to imagine smelling the sick. That deep, earthy smell that you get, almost like a burning smell from your stomach. The bit that stays in the back of your throat after you've been sick. The bile, for example, that you can smell. I can tactile the lumpiness of it. The lumpiness. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to paint a picture of sick, basically, and trying to pair that with alcohol, for example. So I want to imagine that you pick up your alcohol, and there's a lump of sick in it. There's a lump of sick. It looks like a bit of a chopped tomato, for example, that someone has thrown up. Now, if I can paint a picture well enough, and I can do it repeatedly, you're going to pair the alcohol you're imagining holding with the sick to the point where you can then kind of get people away from that, link it together. I could do that a number of ways. For example, I could get you to imagine hearing the sound of sick as it drops into the alcohol. Again, you need a skilled therapist to be able to paint such a picture. Emetophobes, you can come back to the conversation now. So the other clever way, and I think this is really smart actually, is it's linked to covert sensitization, is incorporating phobias. Think about what a phobia is to an addiction. In a way, they're the opposite thing, right? So phobia is you absolutely wanting to get away from something, right? It's you trying to gain distance to something, isn't it? That's what phobias are basically. You're trying to gain distance from something. But addictions are you trying to get close to something. Addictions are you trying to get, obtain, acquire something. So why not incorporate in phobias into addictions and give somebody a phobia of their addiction? So, for example, a gambling addict could be asked to imagine playing a slot machine that's covered in snakes or spiders. And like we've just been talking about, an alcoholic could be trained to become phobic of sick, and kind of get them to mix the two together, maybe. So it's all done imagination. You're not literally, as a therapist, being sick into a vat of alcohol to be like, see, oh, that's what it looks like. You're getting them to imagine doing this. So one thing I would say with imagination compared to actually doing this is you've got a much grander canvas to paint on. I can get you to imagine so much more than I can actually physically get you to do. So covert sensitization has a lot of application to it, definitely. The strengths, it does work. Weirdly, it does work. There is a lot of evidence to support this, and you may need to, on my recommendation, have a look at my slides. Not these slides, sorry, because they're not in there. Have a look at my Google site and double check these slides, actually, because I probably will put something in here. The therapy is based on highly sound behaviorist principles. Like behaviorism is basically fact, right? Behaviorism, association and pairing and classical and operant, that's basically fact. It's not a theory, it's basically fact. So we do learn that way. So it's obviously based on that. And it's more ethical than in vivo aversion. In vitro is where I get you to imagine it. And use this terminology. Please use this terminology. In vitro is where I get you to imagine something. In vivo is when I actually expose you for realsies to that stimulus. And then limitations. There's a couple there as well. I'm not going to go into all of them. Almost there. Last one is CBT. Now, we've done CBT before. We did CBT for depression in the first year. We did CBT for schizophrenia, CBT for relationships, and CBT for everything. But you do need to know specifically how CBT in addiction works. Now, take everything you've covered so far, challenging irrational thoughts, homework, and all of that stuff, and I want you to apply it onto addiction. So you give someone homework to write about. When are they feeling their addictive urges? How do they feel when they're getting their addictive urges? You need to apply it to addiction, right? Apply it to addiction. You're going to identify their rational thoughts. So when they say, "Oh, it's not an addiction. I can stop it whenever I want. I can stop it whenever I want." Boom, irrational, right? Tell me how, right? So it's about challenging irrational thoughts as well. But there's a little bit more to it this time around. I'm adding a little bit more. Salt baying it. So, as we said, CBT is mainly used to identify and challenge irrational thoughts. The client is taught to be self-sufficient. Key term there. Client is taught to be self-sufficient in tackling these irrationalities, and skills training is also employed to train the client in developing coping strategies. This is the behavioral part of it. This challenging irrational thoughts is cognitive. The skills training is the behavioral part of this. Giving them coping strategies to help deal with it on their own. Now, with addictions, the main focus is, what are you thinking when you find yourself in tricky situations? If you go to a party and you're addicted to alcohol, what are you thinking then? What is the thought that triggers off you needing to drink? And you'll work with a CBT specialist to identify, what do you think? Should you go to that party? But you're at the party now, fine. What do you think if you have a gambling addiction, right? You're walking down Shirley High Street, for example, or Portswood High Street. You're walking down these, and then you hear the ring, ding, 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 ding of like a Quicksilver or slot machine place, and you kind of look over. Okay, what's your thought then? So CBT specialists try work with patients or clients to get them to try to understand their thought processes and specifically where they can challenge their thinking and kind of help rescue themselves. You want the client to be self-sufficient. You don't want to have to walk down Shirley High Street holding your client's hand to make sure they go past all the gambling shops. You want them to be self-sufficient, to use coping strategies to help themselves get out. That's the whole point of CBT, is you're teaching them autonomy. You're giving them independence, for example, to be able to think and act for themselves. Now, this is what we call a functional recovery, a functional analysis, an analysis of how you function in a certain situation. It's used for depression, it's used for schizophrenia, and it's used for addiction as well. But this is the first real time that we've kind of looked at it. Is really looking at, in high risk situations, how you will behave. So that's one thing I want you to make sure you've got down: functional analysis. The other thing is cognitive restructuring, which we have kind of talked about a little bit. But it's also performed cognitive restructuring, whereby the therapist may teach the client about addictions, how they work, how they can be overcome, and specific things about the client's addiction. Now, CBT is a teaching therapy, right? The whole point of it is that you are teaching the client about their addiction or their disorder that they may not know about. So cognitive restructuring is the official term for that. Now, in terms of evidence, does it work? Petrie, as in Petri dish, found that GA Gamblers Anonymous clients with CBT was much more effective than just doing Gamblers Anonymous, which would suggest that the CBT does help alongside these kind of AA and GA and NA and all those anonymous groups. Yeah, it's pretty much effective. And that's it, really, to be honest. Weaknesses of CBT are the same. It takes a lot of effort. You cannot really treat somebody with a severe addiction with CBT. They need to be brought down to a bit where they're a little bit more rational, where they're willing to go every week. They're motivated to attend. Whereas if you've got a severe addiction and you're on, approaching death's door, you're not particularly going to be wanting to go to CBT, nor are you going to be motivated to do so. So, yeah, I would review these slides. Maybe not as soon as I put it on YouTube, but I probably will look to improve these slides because I think there's probably a little bit more evidence needs to be put on CBT. But this is actually the penultimate point. If you are studying addiction, the next bullet point will be the last. So hope it was useful. Hope it all made sense. There's a lot to it, by the way. As you can see, you're looking at biological, behaviorist, as well as CBT. You may get asked a question on specifically one of them or all of them, but you need to know all of them.